Well, hey there, and welcome into another episode of the Winsome Creationist. This is the Young Age Creationism podcast where we're actually nice. I said that last time by accident, I think, and I liked it so much, I think I'm just going to go with it for a little bit of branding. But anyway, I'm thrilled to have you here. If you're listening to this podcast, you are probably someone who cares very deeply about creationism and the origins debate, and I am thankful to be here with you, and I'm thankful that you would take the time to join us. So, on this episode, I love this because I feel like what we're going to do on this episode, I have a very exciting announcement, which is going to come in just a minute. I'm not going to bury the lead. I'm going to give that to you real soon. But before we do that, I want to sort of take an opportunity to recenter. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about my past engagement in creationism and sort of revisit the entire need for this podcast and really, in a way, this movement of winsome creationism. Okay, and so when I first started getting into the creation stuff, right, my first introduction to this was Kent Hovind, and this was 2014, 2015, somewhere around there when I first started to hear about this stuff and really interact with it. And yeah, I went to a Christian school, so like I knew about the creationist perspective, but it was very much elementary. I mean, it was literally elementary and middle school when I was in Christian school. And the subject matter, of course, I wasn't that interested in it at the time. And so I didn't pay much attention. All I remember specifically is just lots of talk about why evolution was wrong. And so my wife actually introduced me to Kent Hovind in 2014, and sort of this whole new world was opened up to me. Of course, after spending some time engaging with his materials, I learned, unfortunately, that there were a lot of problems with his ministry, a lot of problems with certain models that he held to and still holds to today that have been largely discredited by actual creationist researchers. And so I'm not telling you to jump on the Kent Hovind train, but he was my intro into creationism, and so I am therefore grateful to him for that introduction and for sort of sparking and igniting a passion in me for the subject matter. And so, pretty natural progression starts to happen. You engage with his stuff, and then pretty quickly you move into Ken Ham and the Answers in Genesis side of things. And we went on a trip to the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter, and I was just really it was really exciting stuff for me. And so in 2017, I started I believe it was late 2016, I started a podcast. I had just finished watching the Genesis history movie. I was going through their conference lecture series, and I was really excited about what I was seeing. And so I started a podcast called The Creation Academy, and life took over. What happened is I had to stop doing the Creation Academy. I rebranded that to a very generic title, The Steve Schramm Show. Lost a lot of listeners, opened up the horizons of the podcast to the sort of blog material I was talking about at the time, which was, of course, creationism, but it was also general apologetics. And my goal with the Creation Academy when I first started was to really promote the model building approach of creationism over the evolution bashing side of things. In fact, my second episode was called The New Creationism, and it was, again, modeled a lot after Paul Garner's book, which really inspired me, which is also called The New Creationism. And others use that title as well. And I like it. I think it has some drawbacks in that it's not very specific. Also, there are some others who sort of use that terminology as well. And I don't know. I think there's a need for something a little different, something a little better. But anyway, so I really started getting into this and getting into the model building side of things as opposed to just the evolution bashing things all the time. And unfortunately, here we are. It's 2024. I restarted a creation podcast, this podcast, The Winsome Creationist, in I believe it was late 2022, if I remember correctly. So it's 2024, we're 7 or 8 years removed from the time when I started the first podcast. And a lot's changing behind the scenes, even more than you know, and that's exciting, and I can't wait to share that with you. I'm giddy just thinking about it. There's a lot going on, changing behind the scenes. Some stuff, though, has remained the same, and let's just say that we've nowhere near reached the point that we need to be at in terms of influencing the masses, especially with this idea of winsome creationism, and really just take a new approach to the creation debate. So it's been a long time coming, and of course, those who've been in creationism for a lot longer than me are probably thinking, hold my beer, or hold my milkshake, whatever. But Yeah, I am excited to have the small part that I do in this. And so even just today, I woke up and I read a very long Facebook post from a longtime Facebook friend of mine who has an apologetics ministry. Literally today. It was a very thoughtful post. It was very well written, just really calling on young earth creationists to not deride people, to not call people names, to not call people compromisers. His specific a post was talking about how he became an old earth creationist after very serious study and deliberation and engagement with all sides of the issue. And he has not had a very good experience with young earth creationists. And he's not mad at young earth creationists. He's got lots of friends who are. But he's upset at the way that most of the very public-facing creationist ministries are handling things. And I am too. And that's why we're the Winsome Creationist podcast. For a long time, I've had a lot of things that I want to do. And some new things that I didn't even know were necessary or within my grasp that we have working. Again, those are behind the scenes. I can say very briefly that one of the big things I'm working on behind the scenes is a very cool initiative for helping creationists to get funded. I'm working with some amazing people on this project. I can't say who it is. I can't tell you anything more of that right now, but just you should be hearing a lot more about this over the next coming months, and we're planning on somewhat of a grand reveal first quarter of next year. So just have that in your back pocket. I'm very, very excited about that, and I think it's going to change the game for a lot of creationists, Lord willing, at least. I believe the Lord can use it if he desires to. So there's a lot changing behind the scenes, and that's all really exciting, okay? But there's more I wanted to do. I tried in 2017. I wanted to build a learning management website, basically a membership site with online courses and things. I called it the Creation Academy, same namesake as my podcast at the time. And I wanted to create that, and I wanted to put that out there and help creationists start learning. That never took off. And there are some others right now that I'm aware of who are trying to work on building something like that. It's the folks from Is Genesis History. They're looking actually to raise about $20,000 to do that kind of project. And so that's kind of interesting. And I wish them success with that. I am happy to help in any way. If you guys are listening to this podcast, ring my phone. I'm sort of happy to help with that since it's what I do for a living outside of this creationism stuff. And so that's exciting. If that works for them, hey, that's great. Maybe one day we'll be able to do something similar too. I still have that goal and that dream. And I've got some really far off dreams that I just can't even tell you right now because you think I'm crazy of things that I would like to do and that I would like to see. But there is one thing, though, that I am very excited about that is going to be near term that I am going to tell you not just a little bit, but all about right now. And that is that I am working on a brand new book. I'm working on a book. The working title right now is The Winsome Creationist, A Fresh Take on the Origins Debate. The Winsome Creationist, A Fresh Take on the Origins Debate. I've been working on this book for some time now. We are between 70,000 and 80,000 words right now. I think we're probably going to land with this thing pretty close to 80,000. It's a very comprehensive book, and it's split into two parts. What I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about this book. I've already told you why, like what had led to this point. One of the things that I wanted to do is write a book specifically on creationism for a while. And I wanted to be in this vein. I wanted for it to be a call to this winsome creationism mindset. To do that, though, there's a lot of things in the book. There's a lot of material that has to be sorted through, a lot of receipts that have to be shown for certain positions and things, and I'll explain some of that in a minute. But yeah, that's the announcement. As a new book called The Winsome Creationist, A Fresh Take on the Origins Debate. I don't have a cover yet. The title is subject to change. This would be my fourth or fifth book, depending on how you look at it. I do have other books available. If you didn't know that, just go to stevestram.com. You can see there's other stuff there. I've got a general apologetics book. I've got a book on evangelism and the Great Commission. I've got a book on why the Bible isn't boring, and that's one of my favorite books that I've written. And I'd love to see more of you grab that. And then I have one on, it's kind of a mini book on death, suffering, and evil. Basically, it's a critique of the theistic evolutionist perspective. That's the only creationist book that I've written specifically, even though my general apologetics book, Truth Be Told, goes into some of that as well. This is going to be my call to young earth creationists to shed the old ways of the past and adopt this new mindset of the Winsome Creationist. It takes, in my opinion, Paul Garner's book, the New Creationism. It takes that and gets out of the scientific realm and more into the psychology of it, the marketing, some of the marketing that happens inside of the young earth creationist movement. It gets into all of that. But the book is divided into two parts. Okay. Now, the first part is called Science, the Bible, and the Age of the Earth. Okay. Science, the Bible, and the Age of the Earth. Why that? Why that? Well, here's my thought process. In order to actually approach the entire creation debate in a winsome way, I think what I have to have is a book that actually approaches the entire creation subject in a winsome way. Do you see what I'm saying? There's not that many books right now who do that. You would be hard pressed to pick up a general book on a young age creationist position, what's entailed by it, and just all those different aspects of it. What are sort of the general basics of approaching science and the Bible at all from a Christian worldview? And then if you happen to be someone like me who believes that the Bible teaches young age creationism, you then have to go further and say, well, what's entailed in that? You're not going to find hardly any resources out there. I'm not aware of one. In fact, Paul Garner's The New Creationism might be the only one that I'm aware of that takes this sort of path at all. But it sort of is an introduction to the idea of thinking about science and the Bible and creationism from a very winsome approach. So I think the creationism, just debate in general, this topic of creationism needs a book that is written with a winsome sort of introduction. And the thing about it is, it's a little bit less science heavy. It's more for the layperson. There is science, don't get me wrong. There's science, there's philosophy, there's lots of theology, there's all that. But it's not necessarily about, hey, what are all the little specific scientific models? It's a very general introduction to the debate in a winsome way. Another book that sort of does this is Kurt Wise's Faith, Form, and Time. But this book is very old now, 2002. So while a lot of it is, good and relevant, the book is out of print. It doesn't have the most up-to-date science, whereas this book does in the areas where it does touch the science heavily and more. Okay. So that's why. So part one is Science, the Bible, and the Age of the Earth. I'm going to give you the chapter rundown. Okay. So here are the chapters. The introduction: should Christians even care about science? We're going to talk about that. Why do this? One of the biggest critiques, in fact, the gentleman that I was telling you about who posted this post on Facebook today about the creationism stuff, he said, the young earth creationists I follow post more about creationism than they do the gospel. Okay. Now, when he says that, I know what he means. At the same time, it's not surprising, especially if you're someone who is like really nerdy about the creationism stuff, or you're a scientist who is actually studying and doing that sort of work. Then yeah, it's actually probably pretty likely that you're going to post things about creationism more often than you're going to post just general Christian topics and Christian posts. But I do think there are some who take this too far. And so I think it's a really interesting thing we should talk about. Should Christians even care about science at all? Do we take it too far? How do we care about science without taking it too far? So we talk about that. Chapter 1 is, what is science? What is science anyway? A lot of people misunderstand that. It sounds so basic, but a lot of people, especially lay people in the pew, don't really understand what science is even supposed to do, what limitations that science has, where the differences are between science and philosophy. So we're going to talk about that, and hopefully we can get some people thinking more clearly about it. And maybe that's something that you need help with too, by the way, if you're listening to this. This is, I don't want you to think that just because you're listening to a creationism podcast, you should not think, and there's going to be a section before even the introduction that says how to read this book. The first part of it, if you're listening to this podcast, may be a little bit review. But I think it's going to introduce some new concepts to you, and I think it's going to be the kind of review that is good. I think it will help you to cement your thinking about the science and the Bible topic, about creationism in general. And again, the winsome approach that I'm looking for, but just also help you think about it in some ways that maybe you've never thought about it before. So even if you're a seasoned creationist, part 1 is still for you, okay? All right, chapter 2, Science and the Supernatural. So okay, we're talking about how much we care about science, but wait a minute. I thought that the Bible was a supernatural book. God obviously is a immaterial being who cannot be studied by science. So we're going to talk about that. Do miracles contradict science? Can we detect creation through science at all? And then how can a Christian actually faithfully practice science? All right, chapter 3 is where we get into the age of the earth stuff. Okay, so this title is Scripture in the Age of the Earth, talking about why I take a 6-day creationist position, talking about why, no, the Bible is not a science textbook, but it is a book of history, and sometimes history touches science in a very important way. And then we're going to dig real deep into the question of, is the creation young or old, some of the responses back and forth on that, etc. All right, the next 3 chapters, what we're going to do is take a very general and broad overview of 3 of the biggest areas of science that we deal with in creationism. So chapter 4 is astronomy in the Bible. We're going to talk about the usual suspects, Big Bang, distant starlight, and then how astronomy reveals the glory and plan of God. So again, we're not just looking at the science. We're looking at what God is trying to do through science and how God wants us to use science to discover more about him and his world. So that's astronomy in the Bible. We're going chapter 5 into biology in the Bible, right? What about evolution? Okay, the tree of life. What about the biblical take, created kinds, the orchard of life, and then how biology reveals the glory and plan of God. And then chapter 6 is geology. Okay, what about this billions of years thing? Where does that come from? The Bible and catastrophism. We'll talk about the biblical position, why the flood matters. That's going to be a huge one in that chapter. And then, of course, how geology reveals the glory and plan of God. Now, chapter 7 is the last chapter in part 1, and that is going to deal with science, the Bible, and the future. So I'm excited about this because we're going to talk about some of those subjects that I really love, like AI, microchips, space travel, all this crazy stuff. How does that fit within a faithful biblical worldview? What does faithful living in the future really look like? So we're going to talk about that. All right, part 2. So part 2 of the book, and you might wonder, Steve, why are you going through this whole big thing? Like, shouldn't we just save this for the book? Well, maybe, but I think this is going to be a book unlike any you've ever read before. And so I'm really wanting to get you excited about the nature of the content. And trust me, we're not like just telling you the chapter titles and a little bit about what each chapter about is not, certainly not going to ruin or spoil anything for you. I mean, this is an 80,000 word dense book. So there's plenty for you to sink your teeth into. Okay, so part 2 is called Creationism, Past, Present, and Future. And it begins with a preface. My preface is on mincing words. And this is sort of a little interlude in the middle of the book that's going to note a little bit how, even though this is a book called Winsome, the Winsome Creationist, that doesn't preclude us from calling out problems, especially within our own camps where they are. Okay, and so the language ramps up and intensifies a little bit in the second part of the book. And the second part of the book is more for the seasoned creationist than the first part. But I'm really trying to tie them together nicely and help it to, again, be like, okay, we've got, even if you're brand new to this, here's the introduction to the Bible and science and thinking about this stuff. Now, second part, here's some of the issues that we've had talking about this in the past and how we move forward. So some people may want to skip right here to part 2. I think everyone should read the whole book, and that's my personal opinion. Some of you may want to skip to part 2, and regardless, I think it's going to be good. Okay, so chapter 8 is, what is young age creationism? A brief history. Okay, so we're going to talk about basically pre-1960s and then take up the decades after that, the 60s, the 70s. Well, we're going to do the pre-1960s and then the 60s to the 80s, then the 1990s to the 2010s, and then 2020 and beyond is some of what we're going to talk about. And so you get a very clear picture of where we're at. Chapter 9 is, how did we get here? Okay, and this is where we're going to sort of dig into what I think the main culprit of what in the book I refer to sometimes as young earth creationism, TM, or big YEC, to talk about some of the good and some of the bad. Okay, how did we get here? This is going to be the roughest chapter in the book. Now listen, I have friends who work at the big creationist ministries, and I think they do great jobs. This book is not an anti-Ken Ham book. It's not an anti-big creationist ministry book, but I'm putting all my receipts in the book. I'm laying out the facts I'm putting screenshots in there. I'm heavily footnoting it. I'm really not naming that many names. I mean, I'm being very judicious about this because I have so many friends, and I think we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think we call out error among our brothers and sisters where we have to, but we do it in the most gracious way that we possibly can. And again, if you disagree with something in the book, then I will invite you to please share that with me and let's talk about it. Before this book actually comes out, I am 100% going to have lots of advanced readers who I trust and who will advise me if I am saying anything too strongly or in a way that is not befitting of Christian character. And Lord willing, all of that stuff will be cut out. If it's there, will be cut out before it comes out to the masses. But the reality is we have to be truthful. And I'm not afraid to say what needs to be said. And it's going to hurt some feelings, okay? And it's going to ruffle some feathers. But if you disagree with me, it will need to be on the merits of the claims that I'm making in the book, okay? And not just on your personal feelings toward this person or the other. And I hope that this book acts as a healing mechanism. Sometimes, you guys know, like sometimes when you need to clean or to care for a wound, you have to clean the wound first, and that part hurts. Sometimes it takes a little bit of the pain in order to get a clean slate and reap the reward on the other side. And that's what I hope chapter 9 does in the book, okay? All right, chapter 10 is The Baton is Passing. So we're going to talk about what happened in the 1990s with the institution, really, of the ICC and just lots of changes that were made, and then moving forward into the new creationism movement and things of that nature. And we're going to talk about that baton passing and the tides starting to shift and change a little bit. Chapter 11 is a long one. So is chapter 12. Chapter 12 is actually the longest one in the book. But chapter 11 is how should we disagree with other creationists, okay? We're going to look at biblical disagreement. Disagreement according to the Apostle Paul in the Bible, disagreement in terms of who should we actually mark and avoid. A lot of times that pronouncement is used. We're going to talk through that. And then we're going to talk a lot about how to handle old age and what I call in the book, no age creationism. Okay, and talk through basically how, as a young earth creationist, should we interact with these people who seem to love Jesus but disagree so strongly on this issue that we're all so passionate about. I'm giving you some very clear and practical instruction for how to deal with that. Chapter 12. Chapter 12 is like over 14,000 words long. It's very long, but it's called From Battlefield to Lecture Hall. And it's very exciting. We're going to talk about, again, creating and maintaining biblical unity, focusing on the right things, on what matters. We're going to dig a little bit into a very specific case study that I'm not going to talk about right now, but a very specific case study on interactions between certain camps of creationism. And then we're going to dig into the science of what I consider to be the three biggest areas right now of internal creationist politics and disagreement in terms of the actual science. And we're going to lay out what the issues are, who's on the various sides of those debates, and why I think that they are something that we can unify around together instead of divide over as many creationists want to do. Now, at the end of chapter 12. Again, it's a very long chapter. And after what we will have just walked through together, I think you're going to be wondering, well, dang, this kind of stinks. Is this really where, does it get any better than this? Or is this what we're left to deal with? And actually, my view of creationism, and if you listen to this podcast, hopefully you get this by now, I'm very optimistic about the future of creationism. And chapter 13 and 14 will both go into that. So chapter 13 is called The Right Starting Point. And what this is going to do is sort of recenter the conversation, and it will all make sense if you have read the book up to this point, is to bring the conversation back down to how and why, as creationists, we want to sort of start biblically with our thinking and then move outward from there. We'll deal a little bit with the apologetic methodology stuff. That's certainly going to be a part of it. But the main idea is just going to be understanding how, when we start with the Bible, we can unify around the scientific angle, okay? So that's going to be the right starting point. That's chapter 13. And then the last chapter of the book, which will probably serve as the conclusion, although I may write a separate conclusion, I'm not sure, is called The Future of Young Age Creationism. And we're going to talk about just some really cool ideas that I have, but also just some things in general that are happening that will, I think, be very much a call to adventure. Again, a call for creationists to adventure, to go out to seek, to explore, to discover, to not be afraid of what we find when we turn over another rock or when we get a bigger telescope. Instead of being afraid of that and pessimistic about it, we can be optimistic about it. So that is the big announcement. That is the book outline for, again, working title, The Winsome Creationist, a fresh take on the origins debate. I hope for this book to also come out first quarter of next year. Okay, so from now until then, the book is going to come up from time to time. We're going to talk behind the scenes a little bit. We're going to bring up different aspects of the content from the book. It's going to come up here on the podcast from time to time over the next few months, not in like a super salesy way or anything like that. It's just going to be really starting to tease a little bit of the content from the book and start getting some of the concepts that I talk about in the book to you as my loyal, faithful podcast listening audience. And then by then, I hope you'll be good and ready to buy the book. We've got a lot more work to do. I've got to finish up the last couple chapters. I've got a lot of editing to do. Got to create a cover. Got to work on some ideas for the launch and sort of marketing and things like that to make sure that we get as many people reading this book as possible, because I think it's really going to be a game changer, and I'm very excited about it. So that's what's going on, and super pumped about that. And you're the first to really hear about my vision and the title and all of this for the book. I barely mentioned it at all that I was even working on it, and here we are, almost 80,000 words in, and I am just getting so excited. One thing before we go, you might wonder, like, why another book? Do we really need another book on this stuff? What are we trying to do with this? And just to bring this back to the very beginning of what we were talking about, actually, I hope that this book is actually just a starting point. I hope that this book actually ignites lots of new books, not just from me, of course, from everybody. I hope that this book would even inspire people. Maybe I'm too hopeful about this, I don't know. But I hope that this book would maybe even inspire people who have written creationist books in the past, who are current creationist authors, to write new books with this winsome creationist mindset in mind, like to leave behind the past and start forward. So I hope it inspires almost a new kind of creationist book. And in my opinion, there's been hundreds of books written, lots of creationist materials, but they don't use this approach. They don't think about it in this way. And so in a sense, I'm calling for a bit of a redo. I mean, I hope that all creationists go forward, sort of latch onto this thinking in creating their materials. Maybe it's time to recreate some of the old materials, create new materials, and have them all be in sort of this winsome framework and this winsome thought process. So, another book. Yes, another book on creationism. Yes, I'm writing it, and I hope it inspires a lot more other new books. I've got other stuff I want to do in the future as well, some other announcements. I think 2025 is going to be a very exciting year for the Winsome Creationists, all right? So I hope you're on board with me. By our next podcast episode, I hope to be able to have some materials from the book for you to go ahead and download now, to get on a wait list, to the launch list, to be excited about reading the book when it comes out. And to do that in exchange, I'm going to give you some materials from the book, possibly introduction and chapter 1 or something along those lines, to actually read and start engaging with right away. So I'm really pumped for that. Otherwise, we'll talk about it here and there, but it's going to come out first quarter of next year, probably, a few months in. So I'm really excited about that, and I can't wait to see where this goes. All right. God bless. See you on the next episode. Bye-bye.